Orvon had lived for 300 years, and in all that time, he had never experienced true silence. The galaxy was loud. Every living mind sent out waves, psionic pulses, electromagnetic hums, bioluminescent flickers, and Orvon, as the elder speaker of the Valith communion, could hear them all. He could feel the slow thoughts of ancient space creatures drifting between stars. He could sense the busy chatter of trade ships passing through distant systems. The galaxy breathed, and Orvon listened. So when his deep space observatory picked up a patch of absolute nothing on the outer rim, he noticed. It was a small region, unremarkable on any star chart, and the silence there was so complete that his analysts assumed the sensors were broken. They ran diagnostics. Everything was working perfectly. The silence was real. Orvon made a note of it and moved on. The galaxy was vast. Empty patches existed. There was no reason to worry. 3 weeks later, a Valith trading convoy was passing through that same region when the lead navigator screamed. A ship had appeared directly in front of them. A small, ugly, battered freighter hauling mineral ore. It had come out of nowhere. Not out of subspace, not from behind a moon. It had simply been there, and nobody had sensed it until their eyes caught it through the forward windows. The convoy captain ordered a full scan. Psionic sweep? Nothing. Subspace frequency check? Nothing. Electromagnetic signature analysis? Nothing. The ship was there. They could see it with their own eyes. But to every instrument the Valith had ever built, it did not exist. The captain opened a communication channel using basic radio waves, the most primitive method available. A voice answered in a language no Valith had ever heard. The translation systems needed several minutes to process it. When they finally did, the message was simple. Hello. We are a cargo vessel from Earth. We mean no harm. Can we help you? The convoy captain did not know what Earth was. He did not know what a human was. But he knew that a ship without any signal signature was something that had never happened before in the recorded history of the galaxy. He ordered the convoy to retreat and sent an emergency report to the Communion Council. Orvon read the report 4 times. Then he sent a diplomatic scout vessel to find the silent region and make formal contact. The scout vessel was commanded by a young Valith emissary named Rena. She was talented, confident, and had conducted first contact meetings with 3 new species in her career. She was not prepared for what she found. The scout entered human space and was immediately met by a larger vessel, a dark, angular ship with no markings that Rena could read. It appeared on her visual sensors only. Every other instrument showed empty space. Rena felt her stomach tighten. She opened a communication channel and requested permission to approach. A calm voice answered. It belonged to a man named Tay, and he identified himself as the captain of the human carrier Jindo. He granted permission for the scout to dock. Rena boarded the Jindo with 2 guards. The interior was plain and functional. Metal corridors, dim lighting, the hum of machinery. Humans walked past her, nodding politely. They were smaller than she expected, soft-skinned. No claws, no armor plating, no bioluminescent organs. They looked fragile. But Rena could not hear a single one of their minds. She had been sensing thoughts since she was born. Every Valith could. It was as natural as breathing. Standing in a room full of living beings and hearing nothing was like walking into a crowded marketplace and finding it completely silent. Her body told her something was deeply wrong. Her instincts screamed that she was surrounded by the dead. She was brought to a meeting room where Captain Tay waited. He was a man of average height, with a still face and dark eyes that gave away nothing. He sat quietly across the table from her and waited for her to speak. Rena followed protocol. She extended a psionic handshake, a gentle sharing of surface thoughts and intentions, the universal greeting of every civilized species, She reached toward Tay's mind. She found nothing. Not a wall, not resistance, not static or encryption. There was simply nothing there. It was as if she had reached out to touch a person, and her hand had passed through empty air. The absence was so complete and so vast that Rena gasped and pulled back. In 300 years of Veilith civilization, only the dead were silent. Tay watched her calmly. He did not seem surprised by her reaction. A woman stepped forward from behind Tay. She was younger, with sharp eyes, and a slight smile that carried a confidence Rena found unsettling. She introduced herself as Hana, the ship's intelligence officer. "We communicate with sound," Hana said. "Words, spoken or written, that is all we have ever used. We cannot send thoughts, and we cannot receive them. I understand this must be strange for you." Strange was not the word Rena would have chosen. Terrifying was closer. She completed the meeting in a daze, recording everything she could, and returned to her scout vessel. She sat alone in her quarters for an hour, before she could bring herself to write her report. When Orvon read it, he did not speak for a long time. He called an emergency session of the Communion Council. He told them what the emissary had found. A species that existed in perfect psionic silence, undetectable by every known method, communicating only through vibrations in the air. The council members looked at each other with something none of them were used to feeling: fear. Within days, the news escaped the Communion. It raced across the galactic networks at the speed of thought. The Bright Veil Dominion heard it. The Iron Reach heard it. The Listening Accord, the vast alliance of species whose entire purpose was to monitor galactic signals, heard it and went into emergency session. A Listening Accord analyst released a public statement that was read by billions of beings on thousands of worlds. It said, "We have cataloged 4,217 sentient species in this galaxy. We can hear 4,216 of them. The one we cannot hear has just said hello." On Earth, an old admiral named Dohun sat in a quiet room and read the alien transmissions his people had intercepted. The galaxy knew about humanity now. There was no going back. He poured himself a cup of tea, looked out the window at the mountains, and began to write a document he titled The Silent Doctrine. Humanity's silence had been an accident of biology. Dohun intended to make it a weapon. 6 months after first contact, a man named Minho stepped off a civilian shuttle onto the surface of the Veilith capital world and took a deep breath. The air tasted different here, thinner, sweeter, carrying the faint hum of a billion psionic minds, all thinking at once. He could not hear any of it, of course. To him, the city was simply beautiful. Tall silver towers that curved like waves, streets filled with Veilith citizens whose translucent skin flickered with soft light as their thoughts moved through them. Every single one of them stopped and stared at him as he walked past. He could not read their minds, but he did not need to. Their faces said enough. They were looking at a ghost. Minho had been chosen as humanity's lead diplomat for one reason. He was genuinely kind. This was not a strategy. It was not a performance. Minho believed in peace the way some people believed in gravity. It was simply the way things should work. Admiral Dohun had chosen him precisely because of this. In a galaxy full of beings who could detect lies, the best weapon was a man who never told them. Orvon met Minho in a great hall at the center of the capital. The elder speaker was tall and ancient, his translucent body pulsing with slow, deep light. Around him sat a circle of psionic advisors whose sole purpose was to scan every being in the room and report their intentions. They had been scanning Minho since the moment he landed. They had found nothing, not a whisper, not a flicker. The advisors were visibly nervous. Minho bowed respectfully and sat across from Orvon. He spoke simply and clearly about humanity's desire for peace, for trade, for understanding. He said that humans were a young species in a vast galaxy, and they had no interest in conquest. He smiled as he spoke, and his smile was warm. Orvan listened carefully. Everything Minho said sounded reasonable. His tone was calm. His body language was open. But Orvan could not verify a single word. For 300 years, he had read the minds of every diplomat, every leader, every enemy he had ever faced. He had always known truth from lies. Now, sitting across from this soft-spoken human, he was completely blind. He asked the question that had been burning in him since he first read the emissary's report. How do your people trust each other if you cannot hear each other's minds? Minho paused. He looked at Orvan with quiet eyes and said, "We choose to. Every single day, we choose to." Orvan did not sleep for 3 nights after that conversation. While Minho worked on the Valith capital, the rest of the galaxy was far less welcoming. Aboard the Jindo, Sora sat in a small laboratory, surrounded by equipment she had built herself. She was an astrophysicist, not a soldier, but she had spent the last 4 months building something that no human had ever attempted. A device that could detect and roughly translate alien psionic communication into data that humans could read. It was crude. It could not read specific thoughts, but it could pick up the broad emotional tone of psionic chatter. Fear, anger, excitement, planning, and it could identify which species was transmitting. Sora called it the ear, and she was very proud of it. She shared her findings with Tay and Hana aboard the Jindo's bridge. The Valith were afraid, she reported, but their fear was philosophical. They were thinking about what humanity meant, not how to destroy it. The Iron Reach, however, was a different story. Their psionic channels were full of military language, fleet movements, weapons testing, target analysis, and the target was human space. Hana leaned forward. "How long do we have?" "Weeks. Maybe less." Meanwhile, in the shimmering halls of the Bright Veil Dominion, the war luminary Tessic received the results of her most ambitious scientific project. She had ordered her best researchers to find a way, any way, to detect human neural activity. They had spent months trying. They had failed completely. Her lead scientist stood before her, his bioluminescent body dim with shame. "It is not that they are shielded," he said. "It is that there is genuinely nothing to detect. They think in a medium that does not exist in our physics. Their minds operate on principles we have never encountered. We cannot hear them because there is nothing to hear, at least nothing our science can recognize." Tessic sat in silence for a long time after the scientist left. Then she opened a private channel to Gorath, Fleet Marshal of the Iron Reach. The reptilian commander's face filled her screen, his scaled features arranged in what she recognized as controlled fury. "You have heard the reports from our scientists?" Tessic asked. "I do not need scientists to tell me what I already know," Gorath replied. "These creatures are a threat. They are invisible, unpredictable, and growing. We must act before they become too strong." Tessic hesitated. She did not fully agree with Gorath's aggression, but she could not argue with his logic. A species that could not be detected was a species that could not be defended against. She did not refuse his proposal. She simply said, "I will not stand in your way." Gorath ended the call and turned to his war council. He had been preparing for this for months. The largest Iron Reach war fleet in a century was already assembling in the deep systems. 400 capital ships, each one carrying enough firepower to crack a planet's crust. Their target was a small human mining colony on the outer rim called Songdo. Aboard the Jindo, Hana brought the intercepted intelligence to Tay. She laid out the data, fleet positions, movement patterns, estimated timeline. Tay studied it in silence, For several minutes, his face showed nothing. It never did. "Let them come," he finally said. "They will be fighting blind." Hana nodded. She had expected that answer. On Earth, Dohun received the same intelligence. He sat in his office and made the decision he had been preparing for since he wrote the Silent Doctrine. He authorized the deployment of the Dokebi-class warships, a new generation of vessels designed from the hull inward to be absolutely invisible to every form of galactic detection. Not cloaked, not shielded, simply non-existent. They were humanity's ghosts, and Dohun sent 12 of them to Songdo, along with the Jindo. He also sent a single message to Tae, encrypted and brief. "Protect the colony. Show restraint. Let them see enough to be afraid, not enough to be desperate." Tae read the message and deleted it. He understood. The battle ahead was not about winning. It was about sending a message that the entire galaxy would hear, spoken in the only language the galaxy could not ignore. Gorath stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched Songdo grow larger on the forward display. It was a small world, gray, rocky, dotted with mining installations and a few modest settlements. A colony of perhaps 40,000 humans. Nothing impressive, nothing threatening. His sensors showed an empty system, no defense platforms, no orbital stations, no warships. The humans had left this world completely unprotected. Gorath allowed himself a thin smile. His fleet of 400 capital ships filled the space around Songdo like a wall of iron. Each vessel carried veteran crews, elite warriors, and weapons that had broken empires. This would not be a battle. It would be a demonstration. "Begin deployment," he ordered. "Ground forces first. I want the colony secured within 3 hours." Dropships poured from the bellies of his warships and fell toward the surface like a swarm of metal insects. Gorath watched them descend and felt the familiar pride of an undefeated commander. He did not know that 12 ships were already in the system, positioned in a careful pattern around his fleet. He did not know they had been there for 2 weeks. He did not know because his sensors, the most advanced in the Iron Reach, designed to detect psionic, electromagnetic, subspace, and thermal signatures, showed nothing. The Dokebi-class warships existed in a space that the galaxy's physics simply could not touch. They were invisible in the most complete sense of the word. Tae sat on the bridge of the Jindo and watched Gorath's fleet on a visual display. Beside him, Hana tracked every Iron Reach communication through Sora's listening device. They could hear everything, every order Gorath gave, every status report from his officers, every nervous whisper between his crew members. The Iron Reach was an open book, and they did not know anyone was reading. "They are deploying ground forces," Hana said quietly. Tae nodded. "Let them land. Wait until they commit." On the surface, Sergeant Yuna crouched in the darkness of a mining tunnel and listened to the rumble of Iron Reach dropships overhead. She had 32 Marines with her, spread across the tunnel network beneath the colony's main settlement. The colonists had been evacuated deeper underground hours ago. Yuna's job was simple: protect them. She checked her weapon, tightened her helmet strap, and waited. She was not afraid. She had read the briefing. She knew the Iron Reach soldiers were 7 feet tall, armored, and had been bred for war across hundreds of generations. She also knew something they did not. They relied on psionic coordination to fight as a unit, sharing tactical data through their minds in real time. Against each other, this made them devastating. Against humans, it meant nothing. They could sense each other perfectly, but they could not sense Yuna or her Marines at all. In the darkness of those tunnels, 32 humans were about to become ghosts. Above the planet, Tae gave the order. The Dokebi ship struck without warning. The first sign of attack was a massive explosion in the engine section of an Iron Reach cruiser on the fleet's outer edge. Then another, then three more in rapid succession. Ships that had been perfectly operational seconds before were suddenly crippled, burning, drifting. Gorath spun toward his tactical officer. "What hit us? Where did the fire come from?" The tactical officer stared at his screens with wide eyes. "I do not know, Fleet Marshal. There is nothing on sensors. No ships, no missiles, no energy signatures. Nothing." More explosions ripped through the fleet. A destroyer broke apart. Two frigates collided as their navigation systems failed simultaneously. The Dokkaebi ships moved through the Iron Reach formation like shadows, striking at reactors, weapon systems, and engine cores with surgical precision. They never appeared on a single screen. Gorath ordered every detection method the Iron Reach possessed: full psionic sweeps, electromagnetic flooding, subspace saturation, thermal imaging. His crews executed every protocol perfectly. The results were the same across every ship, every sensor, every instrument. Empty space. There was nothing out there. But his ships kept dying. Panic spread through the fleet. The Iron Reach communicated psionically, and fear traveled through their network like a virus. Gorath could feel his own crews losing their nerve. Rumors exploded across the psionic channels. The humans were not physical beings. They were spirits. They were demons from the void between stars. They were the silence itself, given form and hunger. Her Marines emerged from the tunnel exits behind an Iron Reach ground unit that had just landed. The reptilian soldiers were still forming up, sharing positions and orders through their psionic link. They did not hear the humans coming. They did not sense them at all. Yuna's squad hit them from three directions simultaneously. The Iron Reach soldiers were elite warriors, fast and powerful, but they were fighting enemies who simply did not exist to their primary sense. Every instinct they had been trained to rely on failed them. They would turn toward a threat they sensed through their link, only to be struck from a direction where their senses told them nothing existed. One by one, the ground units broke. Soldiers who had never retreated in their lives began to fall back, not from pain or injury, but from something far more dangerous: pure animal terror. They were fighting ghosts. In the tunnels, an Iron Reach officer managed to capture a wounded human marine. Desperate for answers, he attempted a psionic interrogation, a technique that had cracked the minds of every species the Iron Reach had ever conquered. He forced his consciousness into the human's mind, expecting to find thoughts, secrets, plans. He found nothing. Not a wall, not resistance. An emptiness so total and so deep that his own mind had nothing to hold on to. He fell into the void of a human consciousness and kept falling. There was no bottom. There was no surface. There was only silence, stretching in every direction forever. The officer collapsed. When his comrades found him, he was shaking on the ground, unable to speak. Days later, when he finally could, he said only, "I looked into its mind, and there was no floor. I was falling. There was nothing to hold on to, nothing at all." Above the planet, Tay watched the battle data calmly. Hana reported Iron Reach losses, nearly a third of the fleet, disabled or destroyed. She asked if they should press the attack and finish it. "No," Tay said. "Open a gap in our formation. Let them run." Gorath, facing destruction from an enemy he had never once seen, made a decision no Iron Reach commander had made in 600 years. He ordered a full retreat. His surviving ships turned and fled, leaving their ground forces behind. It was a complete and total defeat, delivered by an enemy that had never appeared on a single sensor screen. The galaxy watched. Every empire, every species, every intelligence network that had been monitoring the situation received the same data. A fleet of 400 warships had been broken by a force no one could see, hear, or detect. The Valeth Communion called an emergency session. The Bright Veil Dominion quietly severed all ties with the Iron Reach. The Listening Accord released a public advisory that was read by every sentient being with access to a communication terminal. We can now confirm that human military assets are undetectable by all known means. We advise all member species to exercise extreme caution. On Earth, Dohan received the battle report. He read it carefully, then set it down. He did not celebrate. He looked at his staff and said, "This was the easy part. Now they know what we can do. The hard part is convincing them we don't want to do it again." On the Valith capital world, Minho watched the news of Songdo reach the alien public. The streets outside his embassy were quiet in a way they had never been before. Orvan visited him that night, unannounced. The elder speaker stood in Minho's small room and looked at him with ancient, troubled eyes. "Your people could have destroyed that fleet entirely," Orvan said. "Why did you not?" Minho was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Because we wanted them to go home and tell everyone what happened. Fear keeps people at a distance. Mercy brings them closer. We need both." Orvan stared at him for a long time. The silence between them was vast, not the cold silence of a void, but the heavy silence of two beings standing at the edge of something neither of them fully understood. Orvan left without another word, but he did not sleep that night, and when morning came, he began writing a proposal for something the galaxy had not seen in over 1,000 years. The Nexus was the largest space station ever built, a massive ring of metal and crystal floating in neutral space, designed to hold representatives from every known species. It had been constructed 1,000 years ago for a crisis no one alive remembered, and it had been dark ever since. Now its lights were on again, and ships from across the galaxy were arriving by the hundreds. Minho stood at the window of his small quarters aboard the station and watched them come. Valith vessels glowing with soft inner light, bright veil cruisers pulsing in colors he had no name for, Iron Reach warships, heavy and scarred, arriving under diplomatic flags, and dozens of smaller species, insectoid, crystalline, gaseous, mechanical, each one sending whoever they could spare to this unprecedented gathering. They were all here because of humanity. They were all here because they were afraid. Hana stood beside Minho, reading a datapad. She was receiving a constant feed from Sora, who was aboard the Jindo holding position outside the Nexus. Sora's listening device was picking up everything, the psionic chatter of 1,000 delegations, all of them talking about the same thing: what to do about the silent species. "Most of them are scared," Hana said quietly. "About a third want to ally with us, another third want to contain us, and the rest want us destroyed." Minho nodded. "Then we have work to do." The conclave opened in a vast circular chamber that could hold 10,000 beings. Minho walked to the human delegation's platform, a small circle of floor at the edge of the chamber, and stood there alone, except for Hana. He carried no weapons, no technology, no psionic amplifiers. He had only his voice. Gorath spoke first. The Iron Reach Fleet Marshal had survived his defeat at Songdo, but the experience had changed him. He was thinner now, his scales dull, his eyes carrying the haunted look of someone who had fought an enemy he could not see. But his anger had not dimmed. "These creatures are a threat to every species in this galaxy," Gorath said, his voice booming across the chamber. "They cannot be detected, they cannot be monitored, they cannot be trusted, because we have no way to verify a single thought in their heads. I propose that humanity be declared a galactic threat and subjected to forced neural integration, modification of their brains to produce detectable psionic signatures." A murmur rippled through the chamber. Many delegates nodded. It was a logical solution from a galactic perspective. If the problem was silence, the solution was to make them loud. Minho felt Hana tense beside him. He placed a hand briefly on her arm and shook his head. "Not yet." Tessic of the Bright Veil Dominion spoke next. Her approach was softer, but no less dangerous. "We do not need to modify humanity," she said, her body flickering with careful diplomatic light patterns. "We simply need to ensure they remain within their current borders until we can develop methods to understand them. A temporary containment. For everyone's safety. A quarantine. Dressed in polite language, but a cage all the same." Then Orvan rose. The elder speaker of the Valeth Communion stood slowly, his ancient body glowing with deep, steady light. The chamber fell quiet. Orvan was respected by nearly every species present, and his words carried enormous weight. "I have spent more time with the humans than anyone in this chamber," he said. "I cannot hear their thoughts. I cannot verify their intentions. This is true. But I have watched them. I have spoken with their diplomat, and I have seen them win a battle they could have turned into a massacre, and choose mercy instead. I do not believe silence alone makes a species dangerous. However, I cannot fully vouch for them. I am asking the human representative to offer some form of transparency, some gesture that shows this galaxy they are willing to be known." Every eye in the chamber turned to Mino. He stood still for a moment. Hana whispered through her earpiece. "Sora says the psionic mood in the room is 50-50. Half want to hear you. Half have already decided." Minho stepped forward and spoke. "You are afraid of us because you cannot hear us. I understand. You have built your entire civilization on the certainty of knowing what others think. You meet a stranger, and you read their mind. You sign a treaty, and you verify every word. You have never had to wonder whether someone is telling you the truth, because you have always been able to check. We have never had that. Not once in all of human history. Every relationship we have, every friendship, every alliance, every marriage, is built on a choice. We choose to trust, knowing we might be wrong. We choose to believe, knowing we might be betrayed. And we do it anyway, every single day, because that is the only way we know how to live." The chamber was completely still. "You ask me to prove that humanity is peaceful. I cannot. No words I say, no treaty I sign, no gesture I make can give you the certainty you are used to. And I know that frightens you. But I am asking you to do something your species have never had to do before. Trust someone without proof. Believe in something you cannot hear. I know how hard that is. We do it every single day of our lives. It is the most human thing I can offer you." For a long moment, the only sound in the chamber was the hum of the station systems. 10,000 beings, all of whom could hear each other's thoughts, sat in perfect silence. Some of them had never experienced silence before. During the recess that followed, Gorath worked the delegations furiously, arguing that Minho's words were proof of manipulation. A species that could not be read was a species that could say anything. Tessic remained uncommitted. The conclave was deadlocked. Then Hana received a message from Sora that changed everything. "Iron Reach fleet movements," Sora reported, her voice tight. "Multiple ships breaking from standard positions. They are being joined by vessels from at least 4 minor militant species. Formation pattern is consistent with an assault vector aimed at the Sol system. They are heading for Earth. The diplomatic gathering is being used as cover." Hana's blood went cold. She pulled Minho aside and told him. Minho stood very still, processing. He had 2 options. He could reveal that humanity had been intercepting alien psionic communications, which would confirm every fear the galaxy had about humans being deceptive and dangerous. Or he could stay silent and hope Earth's defenses were enough. He chose a third path. He went to Orvan alone, without Hana, without guards, and told him the truth. Not all of it, not how they had intercepted the intelligence, but the core of it. "There is a fleet moving toward my homeworld right now," Minho said. I am telling you this because I meant every word I said in that chamber. I am trusting you. Please help us." Orvan looked into Minho's eyes, those unreadable, silent human eyes, and made a decision that no Valeth had ever made before. He chose to trust what he could not verify. He reached out through the Valeth psionic network, the most powerful in the galaxy, and scanned for the fleet movements Minho had described. He found them immediately. Warships converging on human space, an unsanctioned attack in violation of Conclave protocols. Orvan exposed the conspiracy to the full Conclave within the hour. The evidence was undeniable. Goreth was disgraced. His allies scattered. The militant coalition fell apart before it could fire a single shot. The Conclave voted that evening to establish formal diplomatic relations with humanity. The vote was not unanimous, and many delegates voted yes out of fear rather than trust. But it passed. Afterward, Orvan and Minho stood together on the observation deck, watching the stars in silence. Orvan said, "I still cannot hear your thoughts." Minho smiled. "Good. Then when I tell you I consider you a friend, you will have to decide for yourself whether to believe me." Orvan was quiet for a very long time. The stars turned slowly outside the window. 1,000 species chattered in 1,000 psionic frequencies all around them, filling the station with noise that Minho would never hear, and Orvan could never escape. Then, very softly, Orvan said, "I believe you." It was the first time in galactic history that those words had been spoken without proof, and somehow they meant more because of it. 5 years had passed since the Conclave, and the galaxy was learning to live with its ghosts. Human embassies stood on dozens of alien worlds. Trade ships moved between systems, carrying goods that no species had imagined before. Human music, human art, human food, all of it produced by beings the galaxy still could not hear. Cultural exchange programs had begun, tentatively, with alien students visiting Earth, and human students studying on alien worlds. It was awkward and slow and filled with misunderstandings, but it was happening. The fear never fully disappeared. Alien children grew up with stories about the Silent Ones, beings who walked among you without leaving a trace in your mind. Some species had begun to revere humans as enlightened creatures who existed beyond the noise of ordinary thought. Others still whispered that humans were predators wearing masks of kindness, waiting for the right moment to strike. The truth, as always, was simpler and stranger than any story. Humans were just humans. They laughed too loudly, worried too much, loved too deeply, and could not read minds. That was all. Sora had spent the 5 years since the Conclave working on something she believed could change everything. In her laboratory aboard the Jindo, surrounded by alien technology she had adapted and rebuilt 100 times, she had finally created a device that could translate human speech and emotional tone into a rough psionic signal. It was not telepathy. Humans still could not send thoughts or receive them. But the device could take the genuine emotion behind human words and broadcast it in a form that psionic species could feel. Not words, not ideas, just the truth of what the speaker felt. She showed it to Tay and Hana on the bridge of the Jindo. Tay held the small device in his hand and studied it without expression. Hana raised an eyebrow. "You want us to give up our biggest advantage?" "Not give up," Sora said. "Share. Just a little. Just enough to build a bridge." The debate reached Earth. Admiral Dovun, now retired but still consulted on matters of galactic strategy, opposed the device firmly. The silence was humanity's shield. It was the reason no empire had dared to attack Earth since Songdo. To weaken that shield, even slightly, was dangerous. Minho argued the opposite. He had spent 5 years building relationships with alien leaders. and every one of those relationships was limited by the same wall. They could not feel his sincerity. They had to take his word on faith, and while Orvan had learned to do that, most of the galaxy had not. The device would not make humans readable. It would simply let them prove for the first time that they meant what they said. Let one voice speak for all of us, and let it be the one that chose trust from the beginning. The ceremony was held on the Valith capital world, marking 5 years of formal relations between humanity and the galaxy. Representatives from dozens of species attended. Orvan was there, older now, moving more slowly, but his mind still sharp and his light still steady. Even the Iron Reach sent a delegation, led by a younger commander who had replaced the disgraced Gorath. Minho stood before them all, thousands of alien beings filling a great open amphitheater under a pale violet sky, and activated the device. The effect was immediate. Every psionic being in the audience felt something they had never felt from a human before. Emotion. Not thoughts, not words, not plans. Just feeling. As Minho spoke about the journey of the last 5 years, about fear and trust, about silence and connection, about the long, difficult work of understanding someone you could not hear, the audience did not just listen. They felt that he meant every word. His sincerity washed over them like warm water, simple and clear and undeniable. Several delegates wept. A group of Brightvale observers flickered through colors so rapidly that their translators could not keep up. Orvan closed his ancient eyes and let the sensation move through him. Later, when asked to describe it, he said, "It was like hearing a single clear note after a lifetime of noise. Not louder, not more complex, just true." Then the sky broke open. A ship dropped out of subspace directly above the capital city. A cloaked Iron Reach warship, painted in the colors of a dead faction. Remnants of Gorath's ideology. Fanatics who believed humanity was a corruption that had to be burned out of the galaxy. The ship's weapons were already charging. A planetary bombardment cannon aimed directly at the amphitheater. At the current charge rate, the weapon would fire in 90 seconds. The Valith defense fleet was 7 minutes away. The city would be ashes before they arrived. Tay had been holding the Jindo in silent orbit above the capital. Old habits. Hana had called it paranoid. Tay had not argued. He simply kept his ship where he always kept it. Close enough to act, invisible enough to be forgotten. When the rogue warship appeared, Tay did not hesitate. He gave 3 orders in 4 seconds. The Jindo and its Dakabi escorts moved in perfect silence, closing on the enemy ship from angles that no sensor could track. The rogue crew never saw them coming. In 90 seconds, the exact time they needed for their weapon to charge, the Dakabi ships disabled the warship's engines, cut its power systems, and locked its weapons in place. Boarding teams breached the hull and captured the crew without a single casualty on either side. The ceremony attendees below never knew they had been in danger, until Orvan received a quiet message from his military advisors 10 minutes later. A human fleet that no one had seen had saved the Valith homeworld without being asked, without being detected, and without fanfare. The footage reached the galactic networks within hours. The galaxy watched a recording of 12 ships that appeared on no sensor, positioned in an orbit no one had known about, saving a world that was not their own. The reaction was not fear this time. It was something closer to awe. Orvan addressed the galaxy that evening. His voice was carried across every psionic network, every communication channel, every broadcast system in civilized space. "For 5 years, we have feared the humans' silence," he said. "I have watched these beings since the day we discovered them. They came to us with open hands, and we met them with suspicion. They defended themselves with restraint, and we called them dangerous. They offered trust they could not prove, and we demanded proof we did not deserve. And today, when our world was about to burn, They were already there, unseen, unheard, and unwavering. Perhaps silence is not something to fear. Perhaps it is the sound of someone so certain in their goodness that they do not need to announce it. A reporter found Minho afterward and asked what the silence meant to him. He thought for a long moment, and then said, "Back on Earth, we have a saying, still waters run deep. The galaxy heard nothing from us and thought we were empty. But silence is not emptiness. It is depth. It is everything we feel and think and hope, held inside because we have learned that the most important things do not need to be broadcast. They need to be lived." On a joint military outpost at the edge of human space, Yuna noticed that her alien colleagues had stopped flinching when she entered a room. One of them, a young Vaylith soldier, approached her during a meal break and said, "I used to be afraid of not hearing you. Now I think the silence is just how you are loud." Yuna grinned and held out her fist. The Vaylith stared at it in confusion. She laughed, took his hand, and gently shaped it into a fist. She bumped it with hers. He blinked, then made a sound she had never heard a Vaylith make before. He was laughing. Hana took command of humanity's new intelligence sharing initiative with the Listening Accord, a carefully designed program that shared limited information in both directions, building trust without surrendering the silence that kept humanity safe. She told Sora over a late-night cup of coffee, "We are not giving up the silence. We are just learning when to break it." On Earth, in a small house in the Korean countryside, Do-hoon sat in his garden with a cup of tea and watched the evening news on a screen propped against a flower pot. He saw the footage of Tae's fleet saving the Vaylith capital. He saw Minho's speech. He saw the young Vaylith soldier learning to fist bump. He saw the galaxy, slowly and grudgingly and beautifully, beginning to accept the species it could not hear. He took a long sip of his tea and listened to the wind moving through the trees. He thought to himself that silence was a funny thing. People feared what they could not hear. But maybe that was the point. Maybe the silence meant that humanity was doing what it had always done best, thinking before it spoke. Aboard the Jindo, still patrolling the quiet borders of human space, Tae received a short message from Minho. It read, "Thank you for being there, as always." He allowed himself a small, rare smile, so brief that even Hana, who knew him better than anyone, would have missed it. He did not reply. He did not need to. Minho would understand. That was the thing about humans. They did not need to hear each other's thoughts to know what the silence meant. The final galactic census report was transmitted across all networks that evening, updated for the first time in 5 years. It read, "Cataloged sentient species, 4,218. Detectable species, 4,217. The one we cannot hear continues to surprise us. We are learning to listen differently." And somewhere in the vast, noisy, chattering galaxy, full of species who could hear each other's every thought, humanity moved in silence. Not because they had nothing to say, but because some things were too important for words.